Utah just had a 4-star offensive lineman, their highest rated recruit in the class of 2025, decommit. What does that mean? And we're breaking down which Utah football players are in for a big day against the TCU Horned Frogs on Saturday night. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are available wherever you get your podcasts as well as YouTube, and we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're in the market for a second listen every day, Locked On College Football and Locked On Big 12 have you covered. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by Elijah Grayson Murray of Athlon Sports, and who does a great job covering everything Utah for Athlon. And Elijah wanted to start talking about the TCU game, but then Aaron Dunn decided to decommit, and that obviously threw everything off a little bit. This is at the time, Dunn was a massive get for Utah. You're talking about an impressive offensive lineman who weighs in at, if I can get the pop-up ad out of the way so I can read it. There we go. Weighs in at, he is a 6'7.5" type, 290 pounds, nationally 147th ranked, position is 17th, the second best player in the state, only behind Jerome Miles, the 5-star, of course, that Utah ended up missing out on. So he put out a statement earlier today talking about his reasons for decommitment that said, and this comes from Dunn's handle, that just said, "First, I want to thank God for the countless blessings that he has bestowed upon me. After prayers and discussions with my family, I've decided to decommit from the University of Utah. Thank you to Coach Harding and Whittingham for giving me the opportunity to play for the team." So it's obviously a massive blow. He's already crystal balled to USC, which I have some thoughts on that in a moment. But losing Dunn is definitely a blow to this Utah offensive line. It's not the end of the world. I know he was their highest ranked recruit. It's not the end of the world. I'm going to say that again. I'll elaborate more on that in a moment. But definitely tough news to see whenever you lose a player of Dunn's caliber. Elijah, how did you react to the news?
You know, I was actually in class. It was the first class of the day when the news broke, and my editor just texted me, and I was like, "What the heck is going on?" Because I remember covering his commitment, and not too long ago, and it was massive. It helped secure the future of Utah's offensive line for Isaac Wilson, and it just spelled like continued a really good recruiting cycle for Utah in the offensive line, sector. And especially being an in-state prospect, that really hurts as well. That's the second one that Utah has now lost. I mean, I guess you didn't really get Miles, but, you still lost him on the second go around. And, just the fact that he's crystal ball to USC. I know you have some thoughts on that, but like him and Miles both going to USC is a massive blow for Utah. And I don't really know. I mean, I kind of understand the Miles one with, Utah's pass game not being as productive as many would have hoped this season. I don't really understand the Dunn one, other than the fact that we have not lived up to this season's expectations. But it is a pretty big blow.
I don't think that's why. I'm going to sit here right now and say, I do not think Utah's offensive performance and just this team's performance so far is the reason they lost Aaron Dunn. I have not spoken to Aaron Dunn, but I find it hard to believe that 2 losses to an Arizona team with this team's history and pedigree and what they've done played into the role. Because honestly, if we're going to do that, USC has 3 losses. Lost to Michigan, lost to Minnesota. I love the Golden Gophers. That was a brutal loss. And then on the road to Penn State, and the team they should have won. The truth of the matter is Utah's been a better football program than USC for the past few years. But 2 things are still true. Number one, that USC logo, the Trojans history, maybe that played into it. But even more so than that, look, this is the painful reality of the position that Utah's in the Big 12. The Big 10 and the SEC are just different right now. It's different in terms of the NIL money is absolutely something that could have played a role in this. We don't know, but we know for a fact that Big 10 and SEC schools are making more money. So therefore, when a lot of the other things can be even, like USC is still a top 25 program consistently, right? And you think should get back up to contending for Big 12 Big Ten titles with what Lincoln Riley has done for his career, although he's got to get some things right there if he doesn't want to end up on I don't think he's getting fired this year, but too much of a hot seat. So yeah, I got to believe this came down to it, the fact that it is a Big Ten school and just the ability to, number one, NIL absolutely could have played a role in this. That's just something in the world of college football, but the Big Ten and SEC are the biggest and best conferences right now. And you see a lot of players and recruits want to go to those conferences. I'm never going to be too upset whenever Utah loses out to the Big Ten and the SEC because of that. If the Utah were to lose out on Dunn to BYU, that's where I'd be really frustrated. But the fact that, like I said, Miles and USC offer Dunn a different stage that he's able to play on at this point, just operating in the Big Ten in general, and the NIL resource is something there, the history of it. There's a lot of reasons that this could have ended with him being at USC. And unfortunately, as I said, Elijah, I don't know how many of them actually relate to the football field. It's not like USC's been cranking out NFL offensive linemen like at a drastic rate more than what Utah has.
Right. And, I think, especially in Dunn's case, I understand it more for Miles's case because you do want to go to a place where you will probably get the ball more. But then on the flip side, Dorian Singer didn't get the ball at USC at all. And then, it's a weird, recruiting in general nowadays is just a bunch of guessing and hoping and praying. But I think, obviously it's tough to lose your top recruit of the class, especially when you are, expecting to have this talent come in and be, a big player for you in the trenches for years to come. But again, it's not the end for Utah, and I'm sure they'll find someone who may not be as highly rated, but can develop him into just as good of a player.
And here's something else to keep in mind. College football, the world we live in today, I believe it really is a year to year. You look at your roster. I don't think having players banked up to be starters 3 years in advance is as important now because of what you can solve through the transfer portal. Now, some of you who really follow this roster may say, I don't know the last time you did not add in an offensive lineman through the transfer portal. You'd be right. I can't remember the last time they've done that in a while either. But here's what I know for a fact. You look at the 2024 Utah offensive line and project them to 2025. Honestly, I believe they all could come back. And I believe almost every one of them should come back. Caleb Lomo and Spencer Fano, they cannot leave. Tongai at left guard has been good, nowhere near NFL good. Moka Feces been good. I don't see NFL player there either quite yet. The consistency is not there. Jaron Kump's been with this Utah team for a long time now, but he's another one. When I look at him, I don't see NFL guy. Like, I don't see these guys. If they were to get picked, I think they're getting picked in the 6 and 7. They don't look better to me than Keaton Bills did last year, and Keaton Bills went undrafted. I right now, and I'm curious if you agree, Elijah, see the Utah offensive line coming back intact, honestly, because I don't see an NFL future. Is there a world the transfer portal happens? I guess, but they're all starting. So I feel like the likelihood that Utah returns the same 5 starters up front is very likely.
Yeah. Oh, I 100% agree. I think especially after last season, I expected the offensive line to make a big leap this year. And they really haven't done that up to this point in the season. And
you haven't been impressed by them?
There's been moments where I'm like, okay, this like, especially in the run game. I mean, obviously you need good blocking in order to get your running back over the century mark in pretty much every game this season. But I think there's still improvement that could be done in the passing game. But I do think that obviously all of them have enough talent to be NFL players. It's just a matter of them being consistent in that, and I haven't seen that yet. So I would 100% agree that I don't see anyone leaving. And if they do leave, transfer portal, and then you can just hopefully find someone else to plug that spot in the transfer portal.
Yeah, that would be the goal. And you're right. There are plays with the offensive line. They don't execute on a double team or you'll get beaten pass protection. But overall, I have been impressed by I think a lot of Utah sacks have honestly been Wilson holding on to the ball too long. But look, they have still gotten beat. I believe this is one of the better offensive lines in the Big 12, but they have an opportunity to continue to cement their status as that and continue to open up holes for Micah Bernard. Are they going to be able to do that? That's what we're talking about next as we break down the offensive and defensive side of the ball for Utah against TCU, talking more about the matchups and in particular, which Utah Utes you should expect to see have a big game if you will be in attendance inside Rice-Eccles Stadium. That's what we're talking about in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Hims. Guys, sometimes Intimate moments happen spontaneously, and we always want to be ready so we can perform in the bedroom. Hims provides access to treatments that can help you stay hard and last longer. Give you the boost of confidence so you can be ready whenever the mood strikes. Him is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. Just answer a series of questions on the site, and medical provider will determine the right treatment option if prescribed. Your medication ships directly to you in a discreet packaging for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from the treatments to ongoing care. With hundreds of thousands of trustable subscribers, Hims can help you find the option that works for you. Start your free online visit at hims.com/lockedon. All caps, no spaces for locked on. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ed treatment options. HIMS.com/lockedon. All right, Elijah, looking now at this matchup for Utah, I think the first thing to start with is the weather is going to play a big role in this game. Look, we got bad weather, high of 58, low of 40. It's not going to be rainy as of the last projections that I saw, but look, this is going to be something that TCU has to reckon with. They already will be battling the altitude, and now they'll even be battling the fact that the weather is not going to be, it's going to be cool. And there's a TCU team coming from Texas that they're not used to playing in those types of weather.
Right. And I mean, I feel like bad weather games, or I guess cold weather games, benefit Utah a lot because that is, your sphere. That is kind of what you are used to for the second half of the season. And I expect Wistrcill Stadium to be loud because more fans are going to be coming out, as they won't be absolutely belted by the sun. And no, I do think it'll actually play a factor on the on-field product as well, especially for TCU. It remains to be seen how Utah will bounce back from the ASU loss, but I think they will, and I think the weather will benefit the defense a lot, and hopefully they can take advantage of that, especially in the pass game. But no, I do think that it's going to be a cool matchup, literally and figuratively, and I'm very excited to see how they set the precedent for the rest of the season.
Talking more about this TCU team, they're 3-3. They have allowed 30 points in 3 of their last 4 games, including a really disappointing loss to Houston. They also got their doors blown off by SMU, scored over 60 on them a few weeks ago. TCU's rush defense ranks 106, allowing 180 yards on the grounds to opponents. TCU is pretty good in their pass defense. They've only given up 155 passing yards per game, which is 8th. But in key spots, they have gotten gashed. We had Steven Simcox of Locked On TCU or Locked On Horned Frogs, as it's called, on our crossover show yesterday, and he talked about that when teams have needed to throw it on a big down, they've been able to do that, right? So I think when you're starting this prediction, I think the number one thing I look at is the fact that they rank 106 in run defense, allowing 180 yards per game. I think Micah Bernard is going to have a big day. Where Utah really failed, in my opinion, in the second half with Isaac at quarterback against Arizona was they became one-dimensional. They didn't do a good enough job sticking with the run game. And I think this Utah team realizes, and I think they realize what a good running back they have in Micah Bernard. Long gone are the offseason questions and even the fall camp questions of who's the top back on this team. Micah Bernard, it's not even close. The difference in the way this team runs the ball with Micah Bernard in the game versus any other running back is night and day. And I think they're going to give it to him, Micah. I think he's going for over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. I do feel like this is a game where Micah and the offensive line are going to take it on themselves to solve some of Utah's red zone issues. And like I said, I believe the offensive line is playing very well right now. So I'm excited to see them execute. And I think Micah is going to have a big day on the ground for Utah in this matchup.
100%. I completely agree. And you have Isaac coming back 2 weeks. He's had 2 weeks off to work on his mistakes, but still he hasn't started since the Arizona loss. And so I think they're going to also want to kind of ease him back into the game, and that obviously requires solidifying a solid run game. And I think for the rest of the year they should continue to be a run heavy offense because that's what's worked. And Micah Bernard is clearly the main man in the offense, and he'll give you a big play when you need. The offensive line has been great in the run game, and so there will always, or for a lot of plays, there will be an open space for Micah to find. And then once you establish that run game, that opens up the pass game. And TCU is better in the pass game than the run game, but I think they'll be so focused on trying to stop Bernard that it'll allow Isaac Wilson to have more chances to, settle in and show what he can do.
I agree. So let's talk about Wilson. This is where it gets interesting because, like we said, TCU is only giving up 155 passing yards per game. Now, once again, talking with Steven Simcox, he said that is more so than anything due to the poor rushing defense the Horned Frogs have displayed so far. Why risk throwing the ball and turning it over through the air when you're just having success on the ground? So I do think Utah will primarily run this game. Wouldn't be surprised if Wilson threw for under 200 in this game. I'm going to go right in between. I think he'll just barely crack 200, but I think anywhere in between like 180 to like 220 is where I feel good. I don't see a 280 passing yards against Arizona. I don't see that in this game. I just think the Horned Frog secondary can make some plays, and I don't know why Utah would air it out that much. So I don't think we're going to see a dominant day from the wide receivers all over the board, but I do think Dorian Singer is going to have a good game. I could very well see him going over 100 yards in this game. I think he finds his way into the end zone, and Brant Keithy's the other guy I look towards. Because Wilson at times has struggled in the pocket, just like holding on to the ball too long, feeling pressure, I expect Utah to continue to try and simplifize things for him with a lot of RPO stuff, play action, where run fakes, where you look like you're going to run it and then boom. It's only like a 2 or 3 man route concept, just something that's very easy to read and just making life easier on Wilson. Because if he's asked to sit back there and just pick apart the defense play after play, that's where we're going to get in trouble with a true freshman quarterback. Wilson has gotten better week in and week out. I think with the offense fully supported behind him, the distraction of will it be Cam Rising or not, Andy Ludwig being able to learn and grow with Wilson and craft out what works best, I think Wilson will have a nice game overall. The difference between his Arizona performance and what I expect from Saturday will not just be the yardage, but I think Wilson will come through a lot more on third down when Utah counts on him.
Yeah, and you brought up Singer. I think he's going to have a massive game. Every game that Wilson has been under center from the Baylor game onward, Singer has continually topped his best game in a Utah uniform, culminating in the Arizona loss where he had 155 yards. And so I don't see that connection breaking down anytime soon. It may be not as explosive as it was against Arizona, because like we said, their pass defense is pretty solid. I also harped on the need to do play action and RPOs in my article earlier today, because Wilson, he holds the ball too long, and he's not necessarily the most comfortable in the pocket, breaking down the defense. He seems more comfortable on the run, outside the pocket when as soon as he's outside, there's a man open that he can pick apart, or if there's no one open, he can just use his legs and get a few yards, which I think would be smart to do, because he has shown that he is pretty electric with his legs. The Oklahoma State game is the big standout there. But I do think that it'll probably be around like the 180-yard passing mark, especially with the weather. You kind of want to keep the ball on the ground as much as possible. Cold hands are not great in the pass game. But no, I still think he's going to be. I think he's going to be impressive, and I think he's going to show how he's learned from his mistakes over the past 2 weeks.
I agree. Speaking of learning from their mistakes, that's what we're hoping the Utah defense is able to do. They take on a TCU offense averaging 35 points per game, throwing for 342 yards per game. They have won and lost some shootouts, coming off a 31-19 loss against Houston, as we mentioned. And now they've had the bye week to regroup. And we saw what a team in Arizona was able to do off the bye week before they head into Rice-Eccles Stadium. So how will this Utah defense fare? Well, I do think they're going to have a stronger performance than we've seen from them the past couple weeks, really against Arizona State. Because against Arizona, I still look back at that one, the amount of plays that, especially late in the game, the throws that Noah Fafita made, I was just like, you know what, that's just a great player having a great performance in those spots and situations. But the tackling against Arizona State, so it's really maddening when you look what happened to the Utah defense last week. And part of the reason they are underperforming so far. So looking at Josh Hoover, really talented quarterback who can really sling it all over for this TCU team. But I do think he's also willing to turn it over. He had 2 interceptions against Houston recently, and I do think he's going to throw a pick. In fact, I am predicting Utah to break their pick 6 streak. They haven't had one on the season yet. I'm saying Smith Snowden is going to grab one and take it to the house for Utah. I do think Hoover throws for over 200 yards, but I think it's going to be a frustrating night for the Horned Frogs overall. This is TCU offense. It does not run the ball very well. Micah Bernard by himself has more rushing yards than TCU does as a team. TCU isn't even over 600 on the season. Micah, as we mentioned, is over 600. So that The offensive line, not fantastic. They're in pass pro, they're better than they are at run blocking, but we saw what Utah with a poor offensive line when it comes to run blocking was able to do against a couple weeks ago when they played Oklahoma State. Ollie Gordon's a good back. The offensive line couldn't execute, so it didn't really end up mattering, right? And even the game against Arizona State, if you clean up, and that's always a tricky thing to say because Arizona State very well could have still scored on those drives, but 97 of Scadaboo's yards came on those 2 long carries. It's reasonable to think there would have been other amounts of yards that piled up. So I can't completely take that away. I think he would have gone over 100 still probably for the game, but it also remains very true that like, if we limit that, that's probably more closer to like 15 or 20 yards for the rest of the game. If Utah just tackles and executes like they did over the course of the rest of the game. And this Utah defense has been getting shoot out. So I expect them to make this TCU offense one-dimensional. They'll make some plays downfield. They have some good receivers, but Utah has some good defensive backs. This is a Utah defense that right now that even though the defense has underperformed a little bit, their secondary still ranks in the top 25. They're 22nd in pass defense currently. I think the pass rush gets on track. I think Utah's defensive line will do a better job holding up, and the linebackers will do a better job finding gaps. TCU will, once again, it's not going to be shut down. Don't expect 55-3 like we saw with Arizona State last year, but I do think this Utah team is going to be successful at doing what Houston did the week prior, holding TCU under 20 points.
Yeah, and that's in the post-game presser after Arizona State, the Arizona State loss. Whittingham, one of the main things he harped on, which is the same as against the Wildcats, was the tackling. I think he said that they missed near 20 tackles against the Sun Devils, which I mean. That alone, if you even execute half those tackles, that's a completely different game because you're in the game with 3 field goals, heading into the third quarter. And so I do think because they have been now that's 2 weeks, including a bye week where they had those issues. I think they're going to have to fix those. But I think that's really one of the only main issues with this defense. I still think it's an incredibly talented unit. They're still very good at collapsing the opposing team's pocket. It's just a matter of when there's a running quarterback, they can't really contain him, and that really hurts them. But I don't, like you said, their running game isn't great. In Utah's run defense, I mean, Scadaboo is an incredible running back, so I don't really hold too much against them on that. Like you said, there was those 2 plays where he got 97 yards. That's obviously you can't stop. That's hard to stop. But I think you look back at the Oklahoma State game, you see how they shut down Ollie Gordon, and you can kind of compare. The situations are similar. Obviously, TCU does not have Ollie Gordon in the backfield, but they have a similar, lack of run blocking. And I think the Utah line will take advantage of that.
I agree. I think they will as well. And got a few more predictions for what this Utah defense is going to do. And I also want to bring up why I know a lot of people have already seemed to jump off this Utah bandwagon. And I don't understand why, honestly. I think it's way too early. And I want to give you my reasoning as to why you should still be supporting the Utes loud and proud in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com today. And speaking of FanDuel, head over to FanDuel right now. You see TCU at Utah, and you'll see Utah favored by 3.5 points. For a lot of the reasons we've talked about, especially the matchup in the trenches that I believe Utah will have success in. This is a Utah team that has not lost back-to-back games to unranked opponents. TCU is clearly heading in the wrong direction. This would be the toughest team they've played so far on the season. I'm expecting a big performance out of this Utah team in response. It's already been a little bit of an uncharacteristic performance from Kyle Whittingham, but a loss to TCU would be another level. So I expect Utah to win by that 3.5. If you guys agree with me, you can head over to FanDuel today. How about the MLB? We also got some great playoff games going on there. And in college football, the season continues to ramp up. So make sure you guys head over to FanDuel today and get started with that $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com today. All right, last thing I just want to talk about with the defense. I mentioned I do think Utah will have success against Hoover. I love that you mentioned Utah struggled more with mobile quarterbacks. If you look at what Hoover's done on the season, now I hate in college that when you get sacked, it equates to negative rushing yards, but Hoover has 18 carries for negative 20 yards. So is he a negative? Is that realistic? No, he's not negative 20, but he's not very mobile. So that's where Utah should have success. The blitzes they ran last week, Utah will be able to get home in those situations. And I do expect in this game, we're going to see Van get home. He didn't get a sack last week. I'm excited to see him go back to work. Junior Tafuna is a guy who's obviously took the loss so hard. Expect him to break through. And I do think Lander Barton has a bounce back game as well and gets home. So I'm giving Utah 3 sacks in this one. I think they're just going to terrorize the Horned Frogs. I think TCU will get 10 points. I think they're going to be held under 10 points for most of the game, and they'll get a late touchdown to make this one a little bit closer. But I just feel like Utah's offense will consistently be producing throughout the game. Mentioned a couple touchdowns from Micah. I'm giving Dorian and Brant 1-2, and I believe that will be the difference as Utah wins this one 31-17 as TCU just has a tough time playing in one of the most ruckus environments in college football, Rice-Eccles Stadium at night.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm going to go a little bit lower on Utah's point total and TCU's. I'm going to say TCU puts up 13 on the board and Utah puts up 27. I think it'll be a slow start in the passing game just because, you got to get back into it with Wilson and, you kind of have a new game plan that's solely focused for Wilson. And so he's got to get into that. But I think the running game will make up for it in the early game, in the early parts of the game. And then come the second half, I think the full offense will be on display. And I think I think this game, and I know we're going to segue into this, but I think it'll rejuvenate the fan base for the rest of the season. And I'm looking forward to seeing a win at night at Rice-Eccles Stadium. Speaking
of rejuvenated fan bases, so a lot of you guys, if you're listening to this show at this point, you're definitely still on this Utah team. For the trolls of you that just commented and then left, and for those of you who are ready to give up on this team because Cam Rising isn't there anymore. Look, there's a world where you're right. Maybe Utah doesn't accomplish any of their goals, but isn't that why we love sports? Is we root for our teams to beat the odds and find a way to do it, just like this team did in 2021, just like this team did in 2022. Sure, Cam Rising's not there anymore. It's a true freshman quarterback. That's going to be even harder. But at the end of the day, it's also an unknown commodity, which is exactly what Cam Rising was at quarterback back when he emerged for Utah in 2021. Still trust his coaching staff. Everything they've been able to do. We get frustrated with Andy Ludwig. Sure. He's done a lot of great things during his time at the University of Utah. He's had great game plans in the past, and he's now got that good rapport with Isaac rolling in too. Utah's issues. They've moved the ball. Just haven't executed in the red zone. That's such a fixable thing to me with getting more creative play calling, getting Isaac more comfortable with just figuring out the best way to execute in those situations. I trust these coaches and these players to be able to do that. This defense, just clean up the tackling, and you're right there. You're still the second-ranked defense in the Big 12. You're still a top 20 defense nationally. Utah hasn't given up 30 points on the season. They're one of few teams that can say they haven't allowed 30-plus points on the year. This Utah team is right there. They got a great opportunity against TCU and Houston, who let's just call it as it is. They are both of those teams, bottom 5 Big 12 teams. Right now, Utah is a middle-tier Big 12 team. They have a chance to get rolling over these next 3 weeks and put themselves in a position to go on a run with everything in their goals that they had set up for them before the season. The margin of error isn't there, but the goal and the ability to get there still will be those final 4 games. I'm not quitting on this Utah team. I still trust this group.
Yeah, I do too. And I think going into the year, the sentiment was, at least in the Big 12, that no team would go undefeated. And I think realistically, you're going to see a 2-loss team in the Big 12 championship. And you have these 2 games. You have Houston and TCU as bounce back games heading into the rest of the season. But it's not a super easy schedule after that. You have 2 teams that could potentially be in the top 10, both undefeated, but that just gives you an opportunity to
head-to-head wins.
Yeah, head-to-head wins, and it gives you an opportunity to prove yourself and get back in the national eye. And I think if the BYU game has turned out to be a lot more important than, at least right now, it seems to be a lot more important than we anticipated at the start of the season. And so I think you use these 2 games, you use TCU and Houston as bounce back games to get everything right. And then you go in those last 4 games and you make a push for the title, because you're going to have to go undefeated in these last 6 games. But if you do, you have a good shot at being in the postseason.
They will. They have a great opportunity. It's all in front of them, and it starts tomorrow night against TCU. Can't wait to see how it plays out. Elijah, thank you for joining me. If people want more of your work ahead of the game, tell them where to head over to.
You can follow me on my Twitter. It's at Elijah G. Murray. I post articles, or I repost all my articles covering all of Utah's sports happenings, and I also, which has become very popular, I post videos of post-game practices and post-game interviews and post-practice interviews directly, from the source. And so you can head over to my Twitter and see all those, and I will update those till the end of the season. So,
Elijah, always appreciate you stopping by. Thank you.
Thank you. Anytime.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. Enjoy Saturday night's game. We'll be reacting to whatever happens after it right here. Make sure you like and subscribe. Locked On College Football, Locked On Big 12, there for your second listens. We'll see you after the game.